You're listening to the Veterans Heritage Hour on the Vets on Media Network.
In Arizona, and welcome to our visitors from around the globe. My name is Joe Brett.
And I'm David Lucier.
And you're listening to the Veterans Heritage Hour. We have a wonderful guest today, a man with extensive experience in the State Department. He's worked in Africa and Asia. We're going to get to Cap Dean in just 2 seconds, but let us update you first on our upcoming shows. Next week, we have a great aviator. David's telling me to shut it down. Too quick?
No. Banging on the table. It's a little bit, distracting.
10 cups. I was getting the rhythm here. 10 cups of coffee before I'm kicking the table. We're all over the place. But anyway, next week we have as our guest a good friend and a great veteran, Clovis Jones. Just the name itself ought to attract listeners, but Clovis Jones. Right. He fought in the Battle of Adrang Valley as an enlisted airborne infantryman with the 101st, with the 1st Air Cav, and went back as a pilot, a Cobra pilot with the 101st Airborne Division up near Evans in the Ashall Valley. And then we're going to hear from Fahim Fazli, who was an interpreter, a Hollywood actor actually, who started from Afghanistan and then became an interpreter for the Marine Corps and helped with Charlie Wilson's war. And then after that, David?
Well, after that, then we've got a fellow that I'm near and dear to, a fellow by the name of Larry Carr, who was my team leader on the Mike Force in Vietnam. We ran up and down the Ho Chi Minh Trail in the
Special Forces.
Areas, Special Forces fella. He had also did a tour with 101st. Mm-hmm. And then after the Army, went on to become a Foreign Service officer and made a career of that, lived around the world, and taught a couple of years at the end of his career at the National Defense University in Washington, and now lives in right outside of Seattle on Bainbridge Island. And we're going to be talking with him from his home in Bainbridge.
Great. And so now today's guest is Cap Dean, and welcome, Cap.
Thank you. Delighted to be here today.
It's a pleasure to have you join us and to put up with us as we move locations from secret place to secret places. The Taliban are trying to catch up to us. We're one step ahead of them.
It was a secret, trying to find it this morning.
An undisclosed location.
Well, obviously you weren't followed. Welcome. We're so happy that you're here. And you have such a distinguished career in foreign service and USAID that we want to hear all about it. You're a graduate of Illinois, the Fighting Illini. And you were ROTC there.
Right.
And went in the Air Force.
Actually started off in Army ROTC.
Oh, really?
For a year. And I had switched to aeronautical engineering after a less than fantastic year in chemical engineering. And decided, well, if I'm going to be in aeronautical engineering, let's make the switch over to Air Force ROTC. And good switch. I enjoyed it. And ROTC was an excellent program in Illinois.
I bet. And that's a great school as well. Big Ten school, and certainly offering wonderful academic programs. Air Force took you to Virginia and to other places?
And to Michigan, both 2 stateside tours.
And then you decided you volunteered for Vietnam and your skills weren't needed, and then you still wanted to work overseas, and that took you to AID.
Right.
How did that work? How did that happen?
Well,
for you?
I started off in engineering, like so many people who were graduating from high school in the late 50s. We were all encouraged to go into sciences and engineering because of Sputnik. And like so many of them, we got in there and said, hey, why am I in engineering? And that was certainly my case. I did all right in my first couple of years, but the interest was certainly never there until I took a course in economics. And like somebody turned on the light bulb, I could understand the front page of the Chicago Tribune
Sure.
and the New York Times for the first time ever.
And you probably could do the math related to the economics, right? Isn't that something? And then that took you to, you started in the AID, applied and but certainly were trained in AID. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What the AID, USAID is part of the U.S. State Department, and that's the Agency for International Development, and they work hand in glove with all of our foreign policy, including working with the military. So you got posted during the war to French Indochina, as they say.
Right. Went down to Vientiane, Laos as my first assignment. Took my family with me. And,
really? That was a family assignment?
Yeah, it was very much a family assignment. Vientiane, actually, of all the posts that I ever had in my foreign service career, was probably the safest in terms of my wife being able to walk on the street without any fear for her safety. Just a great country in terms of the people, great people, fascinating culture, fascinating country. So we enjoyed that tremendously.
Well, we had Mark Barrett. Do you know Mark? Mark lives here, actually. Mark was ran the Air Force programs out of that capital. He lives up near Carl Schneider.
Okay.
Air Force guy,
Yeah.
and the Ravens, the Air Force Ravens
Right,
flew out
right.
of Laos. The foreign, we mixed in a little bit with them where I was. I flew in and out of Laos a little bit on the fringes, but never.
All of my friends served a little further north in an operation called White Star in
all the Green Berets.
62 and helped raise private armies up there.
Right.
Well, Laos was an interesting introduction to USAID.
Sure.
I mean, it simply was unique in many, many respects. And in terms of getting an overall exposure to USAID, to U.S. government operations in a foreign country, that was the place to be.
What was Cap? Could you give us a little summary about USAID? What is it? What does it do? What's its purpose? And
Well, it's a worldwide organization in terms of where we have USAID programs. We have programs in many, many countries, dozens and dozens around the world, on almost all the continents. We provide development assistance, humanitarian assistance in all the different sectors, whether you're talking health, education, transportation, communications, democratization.
so almost
Rule of law.
just about everything but military. Does that kind of cover the gamut?
Yes, and even that is now starting to change.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure we'll be getting into that a little bit more later, but increasingly during my career, we found ourselves in places where we wound up working very closely with the military and found ourselves sharing activities and sharing space with the military more and more frequently.
What, not being trite, but the term hearts and minds comes to bear here. If you read Bright Shining Light, Lieutenant Colonel Paul Vann, Army infantry officer, gets out, goes back as a AID officer,
Right.
and actually was the commander of 3 Corps in Vietnam. And the military reported to him, as it turns out, we were trying to win hearts and minds in Vietnam. Too late, but instead of bombing them into submission, we were trying to actually make friends there. So is that part of how the militarization or your hand-in-glove relationship with the military?
Yeah, and that hand-in-glove relationship is getting more and more frequent and closer and closer. Certainly that was the case in some of my later work in my career, but very much trying to take a different look at development, how it fits in with our military conflicts, what role the USAID can play in terms of trying to fill some of those niches that can't be filled by simply the military.
Sure, and that's where our State Department and
Right.
plays a key role. So you worked in Asia for several years, and then you got into Africa for many years. How did that happen?
Well, I worked in Laos, went from Laos to Nepal to Pakistan, and really enjoyed my assignments in Asia. Really, really interesting. I thought productive, had a lot of interesting people to work with. I liked the cultures. And I always thought to myself, why would anybody ever want to work in another continent? Certainly not in Africa, until I had a really fabulous boss who got an assignment in Tanzania and said, Cap, would you like to go along as my program officer? And I said, sure. And after a year in Tanzania, I said, gee, why would anybody ever want to work anyplace other than Africa?
Just describe, where is Tanzania?
Tanzania is on the east coast of Africa. Lovely country, very much underdeveloped, but certainly a fascinating place to work. We had a full spectrum USAID program at the time, health, education, agriculture, democratization issues, and so forth. Just a really full program. And I was there for 2 years and enjoyed it tremendously. Went on from there to Zambia, which was another great program. Spent 5 years there.
A lot of ag there.
A lot of agriculture there, and again, a full spectrum development program. And enjoyed that tremendously, and wound up working there for, as I say, for 5 years, and then wound up going back to Washington for an assignment there as the director of the Office of Southern African Affairs.
Now, this was all during the Cold War, a big portion
Right.
of your career. Did our adversaries have an analogous organizations did they do these kinds of things as well, like Russia or China?
Not so much. I mean, certainly a lot of aid was flowing from the Soviet Union to African countries and Asian countries. And I would say that there was probably an inordinate amount of influence being paid in terms of our programming to working on activities that were counter to counter the Soviet influence. So we wound up working in some countries with some dictators that I would say, in reflection, we probably should not have been working with, but we had to work with them from a political perspective because they were coming or would come under the influence increasingly of the Soviet Union if we were not in there in one form or another.
And I know there was a conflict in Angola that had everybody, the Russians on one side.
Right.
And we talked earlier, I met a Spetsnaz guy in Ukraine who fought in Angola against, or was advising his communist side against our Green Beret inspired group
Right.
in Angola. And then they would drink at the same bar later on, you know, in the evenings. and this Spetsnaz guy in Ukraine, in Kharkov, turned out to be the head of the school system. And he was a delightful guy, big guy, but he was running the school system, you know, quite well. How did you get to South Africa?
Well, as I say, I went back to Washington and was head of the Southern African Affairs office. And of course, our big client in that group of countries was South Africa, and a very, very high priority of the U.S. government and State Department at that time. And this was 90 to 92 when I was in Washington. And probably 75% of my job was focused on South Africa. And as we were starting to move away from ignoring the issues of apartheid, which we had done for many, many years.
Many years.
And started to put more and more money, more and more effort, as we could see that the situation in South Africa was indeed going to change. It was either going to be a violent and bloody change from apartheid to a majority-based country and constitution, or it was going to be a smoother transition somehow assisted by the existing government.
So there was a grassroots movement here in the United States to stop investment and discourage investment in corporations and people doing business with corporations in South Africa. That had a lot to do with it, didn't it?
Absolutely. That was, I won't say that was key, but it was certainly one of the international influences that helped to make the transition in South Africa.
And our political leaders had to pay attention to that.
That's right.
Groundswell of support. So they had to look at it if they wanted to get reelected here in the States, to pay attention to that.
I think there's a feeling among many foreign countries that, oh, we played such a huge role in the transition. And I think many of these countries, including the United States, absolutely did. But the real change was brought about necessarily by South Africans themselves. And we were there to help facilitate that.
And what was the Cap? What was the strategic motivation for the United States, from an international perspective, about South Africa? Why did we feel compelled to, outside of the domestic issues that are domestic pressures? What were some of those international pressures and motivations, rationales that?
Well, South Africa was clearly the most important country in Africa in terms of its economy, in terms of its political strength, in terms of its military. But of course, they were on the wrong side of the apartheid issue. And that was a change that was going to have to take place. The U.S. needed to get behind that change, to be on the right side of that particular conflict. And we probably waited 20 years too long, but we finally saw the light and started having a series of ambassadors that were increasingly focusing on helping to bring about an end to apartheid. I was offered the job in 1992 as the new USAID Mission Director in Pretoria. And I jumped on the offer. I mean, it was just too good a career opportunity. Mandela had been released in 90. We could see all the changes that were beginning to take place. We knew apartheid was going to come to an end sometime in the near future. And
it was still a choppy transition. I wouldn't call it, smooth.
Absolutely.
I mean, that was a challenge.
Absolutely. We had a big budget in USAID. We were funding hundreds and later thousands of different organizations, non-governmental organizations. We were not in a position to be able to support the government. We did not want to support the government. And the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act of 1986 had basically spelled it out for us. USAID was to help speed the end of apartheid, and it was to help train the majority population for a future leadership role in the country. And we were doing that.
Now, did you have the honor of meeting Mandela, working with him?
I did. I probably during the course of my 4 years in South Africa, I met with him on a number of occasions, generally in the company of our excellent ambassador who I was working for, Ambassador Princeton Lyman, just a real prince of a man who made a huge difference in terms of helping to bring about an end to apartheid. But he did a lot there, and we met together with Mandela on a couple of occasions in Mandela's equivalent of the White House, and I signed an agreement right after Mandela came into office where basically it was the first U.S. South African government agreement after Mandela had taken office. And I just really privileged to work with Mandela and a number of other people. The future president, Thabo Mbeki, Joe Slovo, other people like that, Desmond Tutu, and we helped to fund some of these groups, and we funded Desmond Tutu and some of the activities that he was about.
I mean, those two names, Mandela and
Tutu,
are just South African names, and
right.
mean, those are the two names that I would suspect most Americans sort of hear and talk about.
Oh, absolutely.
What was? We have a 1 minute left here. How would you characterize their relationship?
Well, very close. They worked together very well. Mandela, of course, received the Nobel Peace Prize along with the president, de Klerk. They both really, truly deserved it, and a lot of people sort of raised their eyebrows with de Klerk getting the Nobel Peace Prize. But truly, he had enough foresight and enough vision to know that transition was going to happen. And if he did not play a major part in working on that transition, it was going to be a very bloody transition.
I had the chance to, here we got to wind it up here. We're going to take a break, but we're talking with Cap Dean and we're talking about USAID, and we'll be back in about 3 minutes. Stay tuned.
Everyone's going going to need an attorney at some point in your life. I'm no different. Hey everyone, it's James from Vets On. Whether it was my last will and testament before deployment or my ongoing custody battle for my children during my divorce, I needed help, so I lawyered up. If you need help, I urge you to contact Capstrom Law Firm. Capstrom Law Firm in Springfield, Missouri services clients throughout the state in criminal law, personal injury, and family law. With over 13 years practicing law, Tom Capstrom understands both law and court procedures and how stressful they can be. Let Tom Capstrom Law Firm and his dedicated staff take the stress and worry out of a difficult situation by calling him today. We feel so strong about the work that Tom and his staff are doing that he'll be a monthly guest on the show. Tom is a veteran and a listener, for God's sake, so you know the guy is solid and will fight for you. Give Tom a call today by calling 417-864-0552 or email Tom at capstromlaw.com. And don't forget to tell him that Vets On sent you.
The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely upon advertising.
If you or someone you know is looking for a new job or career, you need to visit the pros. National Career Fairs at ncfairs.com. National Career Fairs hosts over 300 career fairs a year nationwide. The events are free and give you the perfect chance to meet some of the top employers in your area face-to-face. To find the nearest career fair to you, visit ncfairs.com. Again, that's ncfairs.com. What are you waiting for?
Veterans served us, now it's time we serve them. As a veteran of Afghanistan and Iraq, as well as a current military member deployed abroad, I would like to take a minute of your time to tell you about Patriot Hills of New York. Patriot Hills of New York is a nonprofit organization providing support to veterans and their families. They partner veterans in need with over 65 health and wellness organizations, community groups, as well as philanthropic foundations providing no or low-cost services. They've helped over 400 veterans through confidential referral services, assistance with veterans issues, employment placement, as well as educational opportunities. If you need assistance or just want to help veterans by donating your time or services, contact them at info@patriothills.org. Again, that's info@patriothills.org. Visit patriothillsofnewyork.com for more information about their services or how you can donate. Our veterans deserve no less. We can give it to them, and you can help.
You're listening to the Veterans Heritage Hour on the Vets On Media Network.
Hey, we're back with Cap Dean, and we're talking about Nelson Mandela in South Africa. Cap, let's pick up where you left off and the extraordinary role the U.S. played in helping South Africa transition into a true democracy.
After Mandela was sworn into office in 1994, our funding levels from Washington for our program in South Africa were stepped up considerably, and we had truly a very sizable budget to the extent that we were getting thousands of applications for grants. But we could start working with the government again, which we started doing. And one of our applicants for funding was Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And Bishop Tutu asked for an appointment with me, and he came in, and I met him for the first time, but he said he had a grant application and wanted some funding. So we had a fairly brief meeting, and we'd already looked at the application, said, yeah, it looks pretty good, but we need to make some adjustments and some improvements, and let us have a little bit of time to study it, and we'll see what we can do. Why don't you come back in about a week? So he did come back in a week, and we were able to grant him, I think we wound up granting about $750,000 for his proposal, which was for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which of course has become a model worldwide, and it's not applicable in every situation, but certainly is a very well-known model and very much talked about.
But that's pretty courageous. You talk about a Black majority population who have been put upon by a white minority. And for them to come up with a peaceful, nonviolent way to solve the problem was really extraordinary.
Absolutely, absolutely. And both Mandela and Desmond Tutu were really the moral conscience of South Africa and helped to bring about a relatively peaceful transition. I mean, Mandela, starting from his own experience of 27 years in prison and coming out without any bitterness or hatred or desire for revenge, that in itself has got to be something that not one person out of 100,000 could do.
No.
And then he had Desmond Tutu working with him in leading the religious groups within South Africa to support this transition in as peaceful a way as possible. Just really miraculous.
Now, during the break, you had indicated, Cap, too, that Leclerc had a role. Now, this is kind of jumping back, to previous time, but it seems to me that the two are connected. Without Leclerc doing what he did to bring about that transition, none of this really could have happened. Is that fair? Is it fair to say?
If de Klerk had dug in his heels and said, the whites built this country, we developed it, we developed the economy, we brought this country to where it is, we're not about to turn it over. If he had taken that kind of a position, there really would have been a very, very bloody revolution in the country. He had the wisdom and the courage to basically say this has to happen. And despite the enmity and the hatred that he knew he would get from a lot of very conservative whites in South Africa, he went ahead and made this transition happen and negotiated with Mandela, who was a very, very tough negotiator.
Is that right?
He was. Mandela insisted on a lot of things, and de Klerk was always coming up with, I'll give you this, and Mandela said, no, we need this, and just a little bit more, and Mandela was
a trained lawyer. He was educated in England, wasn't he, as a trained
law
lawyer?
degree served him well. But it resulted in this peaceful transition, and the swearing in of Mandela was just really a sight to behold in front of the
and you were a witness to that history.
I was.
And part of it.
It was amazing. And
Not only a witness, but you were participating in that history. You got to feel very proud of that.
Well, I am, and I've often said of all the assignments that I have had with USAID, this was the one where I can really say USAID made a huge amount of difference, and whatever small part I played in that, it really did make a difference. Again, it was the South Africans who brought about the transition, but it needed countries like the United States who were in there pulling for it and helping to facilitate this. I mean, we funded much of the election. Sure. You remember the people with their purple on their fingers standing in lines a quarter of a mile long waiting to vote.
We'll never forget that.
Just really heart touching, and we went through a lot of struggles to get the money for that. And I made a few calls back to the aid administrator saying we need more money, and the answer would be, hey, Cap, you're not the only aid mission director out there that needs money. We're already cutting people's budgets to give you money. And I said, well, we need another 10 million. and we got it simply because
it was that
one,
important.
Mandela.
I want to play a little bit what if game here, because we're gonna roll into your role and your participation in Baghdad and throughout that process. But was there a had the United States not taken this USAID position in South Africa, could there have been a military action on the part of the United States in South Africa for whatever reason?
I think a military action by the U.S. in South Africa would have been extremely unlikely.
Okay.
But certainly USAID's role and that of the U.S. Embassy. I mean, we were part and parcel of the same effort, and I worked for Princeton Lyman, and I think we USAID made good partners with the embassy on this. We were part of the embassy.
Who was the administration in Washington, D.C. or at the time that you were in South Africa?
That was Clinton. Yeah.
And so it was a full court diplomatic movement to bring this. It's a great success story in the annals of American diplomatic history. This has got to be a shining moment.
And for the 4 years that I was there, 92 to 96, we had a constant stream of congressmen and senators, diplomatic people, important people from the civil rights movement in the U.S., all sorts of people coming out. When we had the celebration after the election and after the swearing in of Mandela, we had all sorts of people coming out. We had Hillary Clinton come out. We had Colin Powell. We had Jesse Jackson, of course. He's always up there in the back,
Sure.
jumping up, saying, "Hey, here I am." But we had all the people.
Photo bombing.
showing up.
Yeah.
So
Wasn't he the interpreter for? Sorry. For President Obama, they had that separate. That could have been.
Oh,
that could
great,
have-
great.
That could have been. Our man. That's funny. Let's move to another great diplomatic effort. Let's move to Iraq. You became the de facto mayor of Baghdad and the de facto governor of Baghdad province.
Right.
How did that happen?
When I retired from aid, I moved out here. We had family in the valley here in
Arizona.
the Phoenix area.
Yeah.
And no sooner did we get through packing and get the books and the shelves and the pictures on the wall, when I sat back and said, well, that's all taken care of now. I sit back and read the newspaper and watch the news on TV. That lasted for about 2 months. And I said, wow, I have made a really strategic mistake here. I'm not ready to retire. And in hindsight, I was ready to retire from USAID. I needed a change in pay. So I've had no compunctions or regrets about having retired from USAID, but I did need something new to move on to. And I wound up working for the Reverend Dr. Leon Sullivan, who was a civil rights leader in the East Coast and actually all throughout the United States, who had moved out here and was running an organization called the International Foundation for Education and Self-Help. And I worked for them as the Vice President for International Operations for about 5 years. Great job. I enjoyed it tremendously. It was focusing on education in sub-Saharan Africa, and I got to travel all over the U.S. and all over Africa in that job. But after 5 years, I got a call from one of my former bosses, Carol Peasley, who by this time was the consular at USAID. And she called up and said, Cap, you must be getting tired of that job. How about a change? How about something a little exciting? And I said, well, what'd you have in mind? And she said, we want you to be the mayor of Baghdad. And I said, are we talking Baghdad, Arizona?
There's a lot of potholes there.
Or Baghdad, Iraq? She said, no, seriously, Baghdad, Iraq. And I went in to talk to my wife and fully expecting her to say, not a chance, not going to happen. And she said, hey, you've been working towards this all your life. It's development, it's management. They need somebody with experience. They need somebody with a little bit of a military background. You've got all that. Take the job, go for it.
And what year was this, Cap?
This was just before Christmas of 2003. We'd gone in, as our listeners will remember, in March of 2003, and we'd already had one mayor out there and another fellow for a shorter time. But basically, they had been the first two mayors out there, and I was coming in as the third one. So I arrived out there in January of 2004, and I had received a job description from my predecessor.
Who was that now?
That was Ted Morris, truly in USAID circles, a legend in his own time. He doesn't like me to say that, but it's very much the case. He has some fantastic stories about his experiences and travels around the world. But he had sent me a job description, which basically said, you're the de facto mayor, the de facto governor, and here's what your job is. And I took it with a grain of salt. I said, this really isn't the job. It's going to be much less than this. And I got there, and after about 2 days of breathings, I swallowed hard and said, my gosh, I really am the mayor. I really am the governor. Have I bitten off more than I can chew? And I had a couple of sleepless nights
And you were working closely with the military. You had to be working hand in glove with the military. Who was your military counterpart?
Well, my military counterpart, the first time I came in, initially when I came in, was Brigadier General Marty Dempsey. And he, of course, is now our Chairman Joint Chiefs of Staff. But he got his second star while he was there, but we worked very closely together. General Dempsey had the military administration of Baghdad, while I had the civilian administration of Baghdad. We met very, very closely.
Now, were the Ba'athist people working with you at that time? Were the former administrators, government officials of Baghdad now working in cooperation with your guidance and your staff at that point in time?
The famous, or more accurately, the infamous decision to go through the de-Baathification process had already taken place. And everybody with the Ba'athist political party, Saddam's party, had been removed from the government. Unfortunately, this meant that everybody from kindergarten teachers all the way up through Saddam Hussein's highest political advisors were out. And teachers and nurses and other people. And it took us a while to correct that
So that was,
huge error.
you would have to say that was not that was a mistake move on the U.S. part, was it not?
It was a huge mistake.
And everybody knew it, as you were saying earlier at the break, that
Yeah.
the military and the people in Iraq knew it at the time that was not the path that we should have been following.
Absolutely. Two major mistakes which we made there. And it's easy to see this looking back, but one was the de-Baathification, and the other one was the demobilization of the Iraqi military.
Which we subsequently had to pay as sons of Iraq, right? We had to go
That's
back
right.
in and pay them off.
That's right.
We stopped paying them and they turned against us, and then Petraeus went in with a surge, right? But it was really, we started paying 100,000 troops, $100,000 former military members to fight
We
for us.
paid hundreds of millions of dollars out for Anbar province Sunnis to help set that situation straight.
We were reading one of our guests in preparation for Mr. Rothenberg, Daniel Rothenberg. It was reported that the amount of money, we spent $1.5 trillion on our war and efforts in Iraq, and that money would have been better spent had we taken it out and burned it. You know, isn't that an awful thing to have someone opine that, whether it's true or not, and told
I was too close to that to say,
Yeah.
yes, that's true.
But now the whole Middle East is upside down, and it's costing us $1 trillion more to fix what, you know, we spent $1 trillion. We should have burned it instead of the de-Baathification program, and all of those other mistakes caused this fear that we're now paying for twice over, maybe.
Now I'm guessing that your operational tempo was 7 days a week, almost 24 hours a day. Could you walk us through a kind of a day in the life of the mayor of Baghdad in about 2 minutes?
Yeah, surely. The operational tempo was, in fact, very fast and very, very long. I figured most people, certainly the people in my office, our office called Baghdad Central, responsible for the administration of the province of Baghdad and the city. We had about 75 people in our office, and most of those people were working between 75 to 100 hours a week. There weren't any outside activities to speak of. I mean, we would get to the office around any place from 7 to 8 in the morning. In my particular case, I had a meeting started at 7:30 every morning with the ambassador, an expanded country team meeting, and started off every day with that. That was 7 days a week, and then we went through the day with a lot of meetings. I had 3 deputy mayors, Saddam's 3 deputy mayors, who were still in, and they were working for me. Meetings with them, meetings on project reviews, field trips out into outside the green zone, into other areas of the city. Made for a long week, about 6.5 days a week we had.
And I bet you loved every hour. When you're doing something like that, I mean,
I did.
Time is non-existent,
You
really.
live on adrenaline,
Yeah.
and there's certainly a lot of that.
That's just like the Birdman. He's living on adrenaline over here, trying to keep this radio show up and operational. Hey, listen, we'll be right back. You're listening to Cap Dean, and we want to hear from Cap on our next segment here of now that diplomacy is playing a more integral part of our foreign policy. Cap has a lot to say on that. So we'll be right back. Stay tuned with our wonderful guest, Cap Dean.
Veterans served us. Now it's time we serve them. As a veteran of Afghanistan and Iraq, as well as a current military member deployed abroad, I would like to take a minute of your time to tell you about Patriot Hills of New York. Patriot Hills of New York is a nonprofit organization providing support to veterans and their families. They partner veterans in need with over 65 health and wellness organizations, community groups, as well as philanthropic foundations providing no or low-cost services. They've helped over 400 veterans through confidential referral services, assistance with veterans issues, employment placement, as well as educational opportunities. If you need assistance or just want to help veterans by donating your time or services, contact them at info@patriothills.org. Again, that's info@patriothills.org. Visit patriothillsofnewyork.com for more information about their services or how you can donate. Our veterans deserve no less. We can give it to them, and you can help. Everyone's going to need an attorney at some point in their life. I'm no different. Hey everyone, it's James from Vets On. Whether it was my last will and testament before deployment or my ongoing custody battle for my children during my divorce, I needed help, so I lawyered up. If you need help, I urge you to contact Capstrom Law Firm. Capstrom Law Firm in Springfield, Missouri services clients throughout the state in criminal law, personal injury, and family law. With over 13 years practicing law, Tom Capstrom understands both law and court procedures and how stressful they can be. Let Tom Capstrom Law Firm and his dedicated staff take the stress and worry out of a difficult situation by calling him today. We feel so strong about the work that Tom and his staff are doing that he'll be a monthly guest on the show. Tom is a veteran and a listener, for God's sake, so you know the guy is solid and will fight for you. Give Tom a call today by calling 417-864-0552. Or email Tom at capstromlaw.com. And don't forget to tell him that Vets On sent you.
The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely upon advertising.
If you or someone you know is looking for a new job or career, you need to visit the pros. National Career Fairs at ncfairs.com. National Career Fairs hosts over 300 career fairs a year nationwide. The events are free and give you the perfect chance to meet some of the top employers in your area face-to-face. To find the nearest career fair to you, visit ncfairs.com. Again, that's ncfairs.com. What are you waiting for?
You're listening to the Veterans Heritage Hour on the Vets On Media Network.
You're back with the Veterans Heritage Hour. I'm with my partner here, David Lucere, and we're talking with Kat Dean, Foreign Affairs Specialist Extraordinary. Cap, you're extraordinary. These stories are wonderful, and I'm hoping to share these podcasts with your students and others, because this is great insight into how our country really works at the diplomatic level. Let's get back to Baghdad and your role as the mayor there. We were just talking off cue here about the surge and those things. Can you tell us about that? And were you there for that?
I was. I was there during most of 2004. And as I said, I worked with General Dempsey as my counterpart. And when he was at the time the commanding general of the 1st Armored Division, and he left and was replaced by General Pete Corelli, and Pete was the commanding general of the 1st Cavalry Division. But we worked very closely, regular meetings. His staff supplemented mine, and mine supplemented his. We had a lot to share. And
so, were you running the waterworks, so to speak, in the city, in the pick up the trash,
basically my
electricity,
and my job was threefold as the mayor. As the mayor, I was working on trying to administer the city hall, what they call the Amanat. We had to reconstruct and rehabilitate city services and facilities and infrastructure, sewage plants, for example, garbage collection, all the traditional functions of a city, education, health. And the third one was basically to set up a system of democracy within the country, a more representative government. So we set up neighborhood councils and district councils, set up a Baghdad City Council.
Was that well received?
It was well received.
Shiites and Sunnis?
Shiites and Sunnis and Christians.
Mhm.
A lot of this work was done by my predecessors, Stan Morris and Hank Bassford. But we continued with that process. I was helped by a great office staff on this, and we had some really spectacular people. Lieutenant Colonel Joe Rice and Andy Morrison from State Department and others.
Unsung heroes.
Unsung heroes, absolutely.
You go back in 2007 though, right? You come
And
out?
then I went back in 2007.
And David
and-
wanted to know what the difference was.
Right, huge differences. Of course, the biggest difference was the fact that sovereignty had been transferred from the United States, from basically Ambassador Bremer to the Iraqi government. That changed things like day and night. And the U.S. Embassy, it went from being the organization running the country to essentially a U.S. Embassy, far from a typical U.S. Embassy. But we were, in fact, just an embassy. And that was all the difference between night and day. So when I went back in 2007, I went in a different capacity. I went back as the deputy coordinator for economic transition in Iraq, what they called SETI. And that was basically to make sure everybody was pulling in the same direction. And all the economic development efforts were working towards the same goals and so forth. And I was also the senior advisor on ministerial capacity development, trying to improve.
Did the government then, was it pulling apart Shiite Sunni with putting Shiites in command over Sunnis, et cetera, that
Not
fragmented?
so much in 2007. That happened a little bit more. Things started improving actually in 2007 with the surge, which basically was General Petraeus. But General Petraeus was working with a fantastic U.S. ambassador, Ryan Crocker, and they were the gold standard in terms of military civil cooperation. I mean, they really did it well.
So they really started paying, I mean, part of that was they started paying the
Sunni tribes.
and then that the earlier program disfunded, and they were mostly military guys, were they not?
Right.
And then when they got their weapons and
Yeah.
so they were our guys then, right?
Yeah.
So that we could have done that earlier on had we not de-Baathified.
If
We
we
would
had
have
done
had
it
this,
in 2003, we would have had a different
and
situation.
we would have had a different country. We would have had a country actually kind of still standing.
And very sadly, when Maliki got in, he was
Yes.
there when I was there in 2007. Nouri al-Maliki as the prime minister. He really was the one, I think, if you had to point to one individual, which you really can't, but probably more than any other, Prime Minister Maliki was the person that helped the country to start coming unraveled.
So we know the story with Iraq. I mean, we're in a situation there, but we want to get into the last parts of this show. I mean, educate us a little bit on how you see the work of diplomacy going forward into the future of, there might be we're doing more diplomatic steps now with less military. I think there's not a push for military in the United States. We don't want more boots on the ground, I don't think. The American public has kind of had it with that. And we've not been successful, quite frankly. I mean, we've not achieved our political ends with the use of military force. And there seems to be now a push for more diplomacy. Would you comment on that and share with us, educate us a little bit on your opinions?
One of your recent was Professor Daniel Rothenberg.
Yes.
And he heads up the Center on the Future of War at Arizona State University. But obviously, he's studying it, and a lot of other people are studying it because of all the changes that are taking place in how war is going to be conducted.
And it's happening in
happening.
lightning speed.
And it has been happening for at least the last 15 years. And basically, what I see is happening is a movement away from a traditional war conducted primarily by the military to a situation where you have increasingly an interagency approach where you have state and USAID Treasury, Department of Justice, even organizations such as Department of Agriculture getting involved. I look back at all the people that we had in 2007 in the palace, in Saddam Hussein's palace, where our offices were. We had dozens of different U.S. agencies, and they were all part and parcel of this new approach, which people are calling the whole of government.
The Department of Energy and
Yeah.
part of it.
Department of
How do you see this current crisis in the Middle East? How do you see that unfolding, and how are we going to respond to that in the 5 minutes we have left?
I think very clearly we need to take a much more aggressive approach than we have taken so far.
Aggressive in what way?
Well, ISIS is not going to go away.
Sure.
If you want to use an analogy, the genie is out of the bottle in this
Sure.
one, and nobody's going to be able to get the genie back.
Well, they got to be
You've got
taken out, I
social
think.
media, you've got instant communications around the world, and we're seeing ISIS-like organizations popping up around the world. We've got Boko Haram. We're seeing groups like Al-Nusra. We're seeing Al-Shabaab. We're seeing Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, on and on and on. But if the U.S. is going to take the lead on this, and frankly, I don't think there's anybody else that can or will take the lead, then we really need to step up to the plate on this one. We haven't done that yet. And nobody wants another conflict. Nobody wants another war. But I don't see that we have any choice in this one.
When you say, Cap, step up to the plate, how would you define that?
I would define that as us needing to get more troops into Iraq. Not traditional boots on the ground. I'm not talking a division of 30,000 people, but we're going to need more forward air controllers. We're going to need more advisors. We're going to need some special ops people over there. We're going to need more trainers. Right now, we've got about 3,400 U.S. military in Iraq.
Well, that's on the books. We don't know what's happening behind the scenes covertly.
That's right.
You'd have to suspect that
That's
we're,
right.
I mean, with contractors and everybody, I know there's
It's
drone
going to be
pilot-
higher than that.
Well, there's got to be several 100,000 over there, I would think. Contractors in U.S. military, we never know what they're doing, but you got to think that they're there. I would suspect that from the people that I know who are there,
Yeah.
right? Who have been hired and geared up, and they're there covertly, but they're there. I would think.
We've got a very difficult situation now with the Iranian-backed Shia militia. We've had several senior officials say the Iranian-backed Shia militia are going to be more of a potential problem than is ISIS, because they could wind up running
So
Iraq.
this Wahhabism seems to be coming back to bite Saudi Arabia and is the nexus for all of this. What drives the Shia without the Wahhabism? Why are they so? Why are they have a fundamentalist bent too, as Wahhabists do?
You know, I think there's quite a range of different people involved as volunteers for ISIS. You've got, I think, different driving motivations for the leaders of ISIS as opposed to the guys on the ground. I think some of those are in there simply for the adventure and the excitement. Some of them are people who have been disaffected. They just feel like they're not part of the society they're coming from, and this is how they can get involved. Part of them are people who are out there because they did not like the policies of Maliki, and they felt that the Sunnis were being completely thrown out of the political and economic system, and it was going to be all Shia in Iraq. And then, of course, you've got the mess in Shia in Syria, which is going to be even harder.
And then how do you? I mean, it's going to take a team of very, very smart people who understand the nuances to put. You wouldn't want to put boots on the. You drop. It's very fragile. You make a wrong mistake there, and this thing is going to explode, I would suggest. Listen, in the time we have left, thank you, Captain. You've been a wonderful guest, and we certainly appreciate your comments. You've
My
been
pleasure.
wonderful.
Unbelievable perspective, and
Great
thank you so
perspective.
much
Much
for
needed. Thank
being
you.
here with us and all that you've done for the country.
Again, next week we're going to have on our show Clovis Jones, and I should mention that Clovis is in the African American Pilots Hall of Fame in Atlanta and other places. But he, between two tours in Vietnam, he was in the civil rights movement. and met Martin Luther King and knows John Lewis. And so he fought with the United States of America, and he was protesting nonviolently in the United States. A fascinating story that fills in, that kind of coincides with some of your comments about Mandela. Fascinating. So stay tuned. We'll see you next week, and keep listening to the Veterans Heritage Hour. This is Joe Brett and David Lucier saying,
So long for now. We'll see you next week.
happy trails, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight